Cuphead is a classic run and gun coming from indie game development company Studio MDHR Entertainment. 7 years since the game's initial conception and 4 long years since the game's first official announcement at E3 2014, it's time to figure whether or not the cup is half empty or half full. Cuphead's plot is short, sweet, and to the point. It revolves around 2 young Mickey Mouse-inspired sentient cup beings, Cuphead and Mugman, who one day find themselves in the Devil's Casino. After a big win streak, the devil approaches them and makes a deal they can't resist. Win one more roll, and all the loot in his casino is theirs. But if they lose, their souls belong to the Lord of Darkness himself. After a bad roll and losing the bet, the boys helplessly beg for their lives. The devil makes a deal and offers to pardon them from their mistakes, but only if they can collect the souls of his previous runaway debtors. It may not be the most immersive story ever, but it somehow comes off as a little bit darker than expected. After each aisle is completed, the player is treated to a few more storybook-styled cutscenes to enjoy before returning to the fast-paced gameplay. It's much appreciated that the game doesn't waste any extra time on story moments so that the player can get straight back to collecting those souls. Cuphead, at its core, is primarily a boss rush game. The game feels strongest when forcing the player to conquer gigantic, flamboyant bosses while taking on huge screen-filling projectiles. The game's no hand-holding policy can be rough for those who aren't used to challenging games with a focus so heavily on pattern recognition and quick decision-making. Perhaps modern games with cinematic structures have spoiled us. The game's difficulty adds an almost artificially extended length to the game's runtime. Let it be known, if Cuphead was thrown into a 1990s arcade, it'd be stealing your quarters by the minute. That's not to say that the game is unfairly unwinnable though. Cuphead is tough, but it always feels like victory is within your grasp. It really speaks to how well the boss fights are designed. Your own failures feel like your fault. Enemy patterns are perfectly conveyed and never feel too cheap. It's up to the player to adapt and improve their own muscle memory. The progress bar after each death creates an addictive loop of, "I was so close," or "just one more try," to get the player constantly coming back for more. Each stage only lasts around 1 or 2 minutes anyway, so you never feel as though you're wasting your time. Luckily, for those who are less experienced, boss stages provide an easier difficulty setting. Platforming run-and-gun stages, on the other hand, only have 1 difficulty and will more than likely still be too difficult for those who haven't taken the time to understand and master the game's full set of mechanics. Funny enough, run-and-gun stages can be completed in a pacifist manner for those who are still looking for an extra challenge. As expected, Cuphead provides players with the abilities to jump and shoot their way through the stages. But a big part of what makes the game so unique are its exciting additional gameplay mechanics. It feels as though Studio MDHR took fan-favorite mechanics from the platforming genre's diverse 30-year history. To begin, holding right trigger will allow players to stand in place and focus on aiming in 8 different directions, similar to Contra 3 and 4. Along with 8-way aiming, Cuphead is able to perform a grounded and jumping air dash similar to the BlazBlue-inspired shooter from last generation, Hardcore Uprising. This air dash allows players to traverse small gaps, dodge incoming bullets, and increase the overall pace of the platforming stages. When done in single player, the dash mechanic almost gives off a Megaman X pace of combat. Studio MDHR also seems to have enjoyed their own fair share of classic Capcom fighting games. In particular, FGC favorite Street Fighter III: Third Strike.
Prepare to strike.
The big pointer here is the card system. At the bottom corner of the screen, there is a card meter that progressively increases with the amount of damage you inflict upon enemies. Single cards can be used on EX moves, which are essentially just stronger attacks that are unique to each weapon. These range from to huge boomerang-style razor blades. On the other end, if you max out your card meter, you can perform a devastating super art, which inflicts huge amounts of damage to almost all nearby enemies. The kicker here is that there's a much faster way to build up your meter than just constantly shooting. For those skilled enough and willing to take risks, there is a parry that can be performed on every single pink object in the game. Just tap jump again right before landing on top of a pink projectile, and you can completely negate any damage while stylishly building your card meter. There are very few things as satisfying as chaining dodge parries in succession, only to unleash your own barrage of EX attacks. Anyhow, run and gun platforming stages have hidden coins that can be spent at the local skill shop between bosses. Before each stage, you're given the chance to edit your skill card in the overworld. This allows each player to equip 2 different guns, 1 charm, and their super art of choice. There's a decently wide selection of different guns that all serve different purposes, along with charms that range from invincible yet invisible super dashes to extra health at the cost of a lower damage output. This basic level of customization adds replayability and allows players to explore what works best depending on particular boss matchups. The boss fights themselves feel carefully crafted and offer a diverse set of interesting gimmicks that never seem to overstay their welcome. It's really exciting to see what attacks are coming next, since the bosses always find new ways to keep the player on their toes. Unfortunately, the run and gun platforming stages can sometimes feel a bit cumbersome. Obnoxiously high enemy respawn rates can make stages feel cluttered and claustrophobic. It often seemed as though the quantity of enemies was more important than the actual quality of where they were placed. For players who are hoping for a more classical Mega Man style of platforming, it's easy to empathize with why some may come out a little bit disappointed. The constant influx of fodder enemies can make the actual platforming itself feel clunky and slower paced, especially if done with 2 players. Speaking of co-op, player 2 controls Mugman, Cuphead's partner in crime, who also drinks out of his own head for some reason. Local multiplayer is a blast and is a much appreciated addition to the game, despite it increasing difficulty and making platforming segments more awkward to play at times. It's also unfortunate that there isn't an option for net play. Outside of boss fights and platforming stages, Cuphead also changes flavors by offering fun little parry-focused bonus rounds. These challenges often offer new super arts when completed. There are also Gradius-style boss fights where you take control of a small plane. These aerial dogfights are far and few in between, but they ended up being some of my personal favorites by the end of my playthrough. A main draw outside of the satisfying gameplay is Studio MDHR's beautifully animated visuals. Each stage provides eye-popping animation along with a colorful cast of diverse enemies who really go the extra mile in giving life to the world. The game's hand-drawn animations really make you feel like you're playing a modern-day cartoon, but with wonderful 60 FPS gameplay. The soundtrack also features an amazingly catchy jazz band with multiple addicting tunes that rang in my ears even days after completion. Both of these elements perfectly synchronize to formulate a subtly dark, charming, and engaging world that I just couldn't wait to return to. Cuphead combines tight controls, gorgeous hand-drawn art, catchy tunes, and challenging gameplay in one package. Very few modern titles today know how to respectfully learn from its ancestors and often end up cashing in on ideas versus actual implementation of mechanics. Studio MDHR has expertly shown the level of polish, style, and substance for their game to stand toe-to-toe with the greats. Cuphead doesn't concern itself with being half empty. No, it confidently knows that the cup can be filled much, much more than even just half full. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to check out some of my other content and hit that subscribe button. It'd really mean a lot to me since this is my first time ever trying something like this. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys later.